let's bring in our political panel to weigh in on all of this. Joining us, Lauren Zelt, Republican strategist and former aide to Mitt Romney, and Basil Smickley. Sorry, Basil, I know I pronounced your name wrong on that one.
Okay.
Smichael, he's the Democratic strategist and former executive director of New York State Democratic Party. Welcome into both of you. Lauren, let's jump in with you, and good New Year to you. Happy New Year. Why is the president doing this, first of all? The big question here is, isn't this hurting Republican efforts to get the voters out to the polls?
Well, good morning and Happy New Year. Yeah, I'd like to echo the concerns that Shannon pointed out in her reporting, and that Republicans would really like to focus on Tuesday's runoff elections being about creating a firewall between President-elect Biden, the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, and what we're hoping will be a Republican-controlled Senate. I mean, ultimately, I think what you're seeing here is the nature of President Trump and how he's been for the last 4+ years. He's more concerned about his own legacy, about undermining the election results in Georgia and across the nation that delivered him a loss and a win to President-elect Biden. He cares more about that at this point than ensuring that Republicans solidify the majority moving forward. And that's a problem, because when you get voters to not trust the election system, as we have coming up on Tuesday, is it going to depress turnout? We've already seen early voting close. Republicans and Democrats have done a lot to try to get the vote out early, and President Trump is planning to rally on Monday. But his statements are contradictory. Candidly, I wonder why he's even going when he's saying things like, you can't trust the election system. Republicans in Georgia are probably confused and saying, well, why should I go vote if I can't trust the system? So I do think it's harmful. It's also not helpful that he's aligning himself with the messaging coming out from the Democrats on the $2,000 stimulus, which both Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue have said that they agreed with, but it's getting lost. Leading up to the presidential election, Republicans had the edge on messaging because ultimately Democrats had blocked the last COVID stimulus vote, but that's not the case anymore. And Trump is really doing a lot of damage with the messaging heading into Tuesday for Republicans.
Basil, does this provide an opening for Democrats in the final stretch of the campaign, or maybe does this in some way motivate Republicans and get them to turn out on Tuesday?
No, my sense is that it has the effect of tamping down the vote. And if you look at what's already occurred in the state, you've got over just about 3 million early votes, which would tend to favor Democrats. I know that Republicans will traditionally will turn out in the, quote, traditional way on election day, but those 3 million early votes, that's telling. It's telling because you do see a tremendous amount of enthusiasm on the ground. We've been often talking about the work that Stacey Abrams and others have been doing in the state for the last few years. And, owing to a point that was just made, Democrats are very mindful of what's at stake here. It's about giving the ability to a president-elect Joe Biden to be able to push his agenda through. And Democrats are keenly aware of that. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree that we've got to be Republicans shaking their heads saying, what is this president doing? And I imagine that you're seeing, even though there's, Mitch McConnell has now sort of thwarted $2,000 payment to Americans, I think 4 times now, there is this evidence that Republicans are trying to figure out and chart their new course in a post-Trump environment, because he does seem to be more concerned about his legacy than he is about trying to bring his party together and push them forward in a Biden era.
And Basil, you bring up a good point here about moving forward the president's power. We talked about those $2,000 stimulus checks that the president had wanted, plus the Senate also dealing that overwhelming majority override to the president's veto of the defense spending bill. So now there's reporting that those close to Trump say he feels that he's worried that he's losing power with Republicans. Do you think that's true? How do you assess that?
In my view, I think, he's losing power with some of maybe the Republican elite or the Republican leadership, because they have to figure out what they're going to do now that he's not in office. They've got important elections coming up next year in 2022. They need to start raising money for that, quite frankly. And so they're questioning whether or not staying with Trump and, you know, watching him energize his base, how does that help them versus, as I was saying, you know, charting their own course. We saw already the Secretary of State and Governor of Georgia, Trump supporters, who said after the election, look, we may not have liked the outcome. We may have wanted a different outcome, but we have to exercise the law here. We have to actually do what's right by the voters of the state of Georgia. I may have disagreed with them prior to this, but on those particular points, you know, they're saying to themselves, we got to create some separation here because it's about our future.
Lauren Zelt and Basil Smikle, thank you both so much, and we will have a lot more on the Georgia runoffs later on in the show.
All right, we want to turn now to the pandemic.